when we were looking at this kind of unit for our adult forum, I felt called to talk to you about some of the work I do with my clients. I'm a coach and I'm a speech pathologist. So my work as a speech pathologist veered into coaching when I took 12 years off to raise my children. And I have my master's and I'm licensed and certified, and I've worked in kind of intense situations in acute care, tertiary care, teaching hospitals with people who've had pretty severe losses. So I'm used to going into ICUs, and I'm used to going into places where I have to look up what this diagnosis is, because I'm thinking, so what is going on with this person and how can I help this person? And then I stayed home with my kids, and that was a big adjustment. But I figured it out, and 12 years later, I decided to go back to work, and I'm terrified. And I thought, why am I so scared? I used to be so brave. What happened to that brave person inside? And I thought, why am I even doing this? Why am I making myself go through this? And I realized that there was something inside of me, as happy as I was with my marriage, my family, my physical environment, my kids, I had something inside of me that was withering, and something inside of me that needed to grow. And I knew that for me, the way to make that happen was to start to return to work. So I did it. I got through my fears, just slogging through step by step, and I ended up working in research at ODU, and I supervised clinical graduate students working in a preschool for kids with cochlear implants with hearing loss. And it was not the right work for me, but it was a very important step, and I was so proud to be back at work. And I did that for 3 years. But along the way, I thought of all of this talent sitting on the bench. I thought of so many professionals, so many talented people who have so much to give and are intimidated at the process of stepping outside of their comfort zone to go out and be who they are and help the world. So I started wanting to speak to that population, and that's why I got my degree, my second kind of certification in coaching, because that's what I wished I'd had, that structure and support. And what I want to share with you today is something that's very basic and fundamental in the coaching I do, either in workshops or with my clients, and it's to look at our values. Because when we're connected to our values, we find the courage to do what we need to do. Any questions? All right, let's go on. So I decided to go Google Christ in St. Luke's and look at what our values as a church are that we express online. And this is what I found. And it's a bit of a PowerPoint no-no to have this many bullets on there, but this is what I saw. And I think this pretty much covers it. And as I looked at this, I thought about how each of us probably connect more to one of these values to another. And one way to start to look at our values personally is to see which of these values really kind of lights me up. Like I think this is important, but I really connect to this. And so I just invite you to look over the list and see what speaks to you. And this is our identity as a church. So I think our values say more about who we are than our titles, or like that we're Episcopalian. I think this is who we are. So I just thought that was interesting to look at that. And then I decided to look at, so let me ask you, what do you think of this? What do y'all think about our list of values? Do you think it's complete? Is there anything you'd add to it, or anything that you think is more important than something else on there?
Melissa, was there any reason for the order in which you got them listed?
That's the order in which they're listed on our website.
I do think probably being Episcopalian is important because it is emphasized here more than perhaps other places where they try to be Baptist and other things.
So you'd add that to the list, to be Episcopalian. So when we feel passionate about something like respect and seeing the dignity in every human being, that tells us something about one of our core values. And one signal that we have a value that's being stepped on is when we get mad. So, you know, sometimes our anger can be a really good signal that, well, something that's really important to me here is being messed with. And I think bringing that conscious intention to what's happening inside of us can help us respond a lot more powerfully to situations we encounter. I'm going to move now to, okay, this is what I found, and I do not pretend to be any kind of biblical scholar at all, but I think that for me, I looked at, well, what are Jesus' values that I see? And I know he gave the commandments to love God with all your heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. And I looked at how he lived his life, and it was to serve others and to live life abundantly. So these are the values I saw in Jesus, and this is what I like about Christianity, and how I connect to Christianity. And I think it's probably different for all of us, but I'm wondering, as you think about your own connection, or why you're even Christian, or what it means to you, what are the values that you connect to? What are the values that are important to you? Do you like those? I like it when it's really simple. Yeah, I like having, if I could have done it 3, that would have been even better. But sometimes they're easier to remember.
Well, I think going with the first 2 there is love. That's what draws me to this congregation. That's what draws me to God, is his love for me and for others. And, you know, the love that we show each other.
Yes.
And so, you know, to me, what you've got there is obvious.
Good. Yeah, and I find the love your neighbor as yourself, what I found in the people that I work with in the workshops, that the love yourself part can actually be really hard, because we tend to be so hard on ourselves, and I don't think this was always the case. Some really interesting research is coming out of University of Texas at Austin from a social psychologist named Kristen Neff, and she's looking at the role of self-compassion in our overall effectiveness in dealing with adversity. And it's really powerful. And there are 3 simple steps. The first step is to acknowledge pain, the pain of what's happening. Like, this is, and she uses very Buddhist terminologies, but she'll say this is a moment of suffering. And so, for instance, when my dog was very ill and I took her to the vet, and it was very difficult, she was in pain, and I had to go to a competition my daughter was in Charlottesville that very morning. It was all unexpected. And I was holding it together, and I dropped her off at the emergency vet, and then I went into the restroom, and I thought, and I was getting ready to do another workshop on this very subject, and I thought, well, let me see if this really works, the self-compassion, these 3 steps. And the first step, I thought, this is a moment of suffering. And I just started crying because I'd been holding it together, and I was very upset. And then the second step is to acknowledge the common humanity. And I thought, everybody who's ever had a dog and loved their dog has felt this pain when their dog is suffering. And I just thought, you know, I'm in there with all the dog lovers who don't want to see their dog hurting. And that made me feel a lot better. And then the third step is to say to yourself, what is the kindest thing I can do for myself right now? And I thought, what is the kindest thing I could do for myself right now? And I thought, and I didn't try to think up here. I let the response come from where I wasn't trying to control it. And it came, the kindest thing I can do for myself right now is not to feel like I have to hold it together, not to have it all figured out. And then I went on my way, and I went to Charlottesville and all. But it was very helpful to me. I didn't figure it out, and I just had to live with what was. But anyway, this love yourself is something we could do a whole other workshop on. But that's a really powerful habit to try to get into. So what I'd like you to do now, if you don't have a handout, I have some up here and I can give some to you, and I have some pens. But I want you to think of 5 values that you hold dear, and they can be anything. There are people, there's integrity, there's creativity, there's your spiritual life. I've worked with a coach, and one of his values was chocolate. So anything that you always want to include in your life that's important to you. And I'd like you to write them down. And if you don't write them down, at least think of what are 5 values. And we're going to do something with these values. So some 5 of your own core values, part of what makes you you and that you know is super important to you. So we'll just take a minute to write these down. I want you next to each value to write some words that you associate with that value. So, for example, one of my values is humor. And I just did this I call it a daisy chain. It's like a word association thing. I thought, what do I associate with humor? I thought laughter, your tickle spot, shared joy, lightheartedness. And it's interesting to do this because you find you kind of flesh out your value and you see different dimensions to it. And it might even bring up some other values that are even deeper than the one that you came up with originally. This is one more part where you are active and I'm quiet. I want you to imagine that you have access to a billboard that thousands of people will see every single day. I always imagine that billboard off of 64 in Richmond. It usually has I think it has Bon Secours. Always has like some hospital thing on there, but I see it every time I go through there. But thousands of people will see your billboard, and you can put any message you want on there. And to give you an idea of the range of messages possible, when I did this exercise in my coach's training, I was thinking, be grateful for this amazing life that you have right now and that sort of thing. And I asked my husband, well, what would you put on your billboard when I came home from my weekend training? And he said, he used an expletive, which I won't repeat, but he said, get off your cell phone. And so that was his billboard. And I was dumbfounded, and I said, that's it? That's what you're going to tell thousands and thousands of people? And he said, yeah. He said, people die, when they're on. I thought, well, maybe, I think his will have more impact than mine. So at any rate, so that's just to give you an idea. There's no wrong thing. And again, this is just easy peasy what comes to mind. Write down on the back of your sheet of paper what you would have on your billboard. Thousands of people will be seeing it. And it's just a thought, it's some seed you're planting, but something you want them to know that you're sharing with them. Emily, why don't you start and tell us what's on your billboard?
Carpe diem.
What's that?
Carpe diem.
Carpe diem. Nice.
Today.
Yes. And what do you have?
I would put God loves me just the way I am.
Nice. Nice. And how about you, Andrea?
Be kind.
Be kind. Yes. Nice. What do you have on yours?
The only thing that I got so far was life is short.
Life is short. Yes. I agree. Yes. How about you, Tim?
Make someone smile today.
Nice.
Always look on the bright side.
Yeah. What you?
Breathe deeply, slowly.
That's a good reminder. I'm going to do that now. Okay. All right. And what do you have?
Go for it.
Go for it. First that, and then yeah. That would just fire me up. Right. Nice. And what do you have?
Think positive.
Nice. Yes.
Share love.
Beautiful. And what do you have?
Or never give up.
Never give up. Very nice.
I'm here to serve.
I'm here to serve. Wonderful. How about you, Angelica?
Well, sort of two. The first one that came to mind was being tolerant of intolerance. And the second one was just smile, make someone happy.
Yeah, smile makes someone happy. Yeah, that's kind of that justice and heart. Yeah. How about you, Vicki?
I'm going to recommend Andrea. Mine's going to say, be kind to yourself and to others.
Right. And what do you have?
Be grateful for your life.
Ah, that was like me, yeah. And what do you have on yours?
I got preoccupied. I was telling Glenn that in the 70 years that I've been looking at billboards, the one that sticks in my mind was one I saw in Georgia in the 60s that said, "Who is John Galt?"
Oh, yeah.
Could I come up with something better than that?
Diversionary tactic, yeah. How about you, Glenn?
The loved one another.
Right, that goes back to that respect too. Yeah. How about you, Pat?
Having just spent 4 days on the highways, I had to go with what your husband was saying. Said it this way: do not phone or text while driving.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if they're driving, they're going to notice things.
Right, right. And we'll just go down the line. Why don't you?
Be generous with your love.
Be generous with your love. That's lovely. Yes.
Be kind, respect your elders, and love God.
Be kind, respect your elders, and love God. Okay, Leonard's bowing out. You're excused. Okay.
I put down, know your history, but be not chained to it.
Know your history, but be not chained to it. Very nice.
God is funny.
God is funny. Nice. Wonderful. Well, our billboards can give us a little glimpse into our values as well and what's important to us. So we've done some brief, like a pretty condensed version of looking at our values. And the reason we do this is because anytime we're transitioning or making a change out of our status quo, we're going to have a lot of pushback from a part of our brain that's interested in our survival. So our brains are kind of divided out, as a lot of you already know, like the prefrontal cortex is our most evolved part of our brain, and it's where we have our reasoning, it's where we have impulse control, we have knowledge of the passage of time, we set our goals there. Just a lot of it's like called executive functions. It's where we execute. So we plan and we come up with what we want to do, and we get to our goal despite other temptations that would hold us away from it. The other part of our brain is much more interested in our survival and our connection to what we need to survive, like our food and our loved ones and that sort of thing. So when we start to step outside of our comfort zone, and that usually happens when we're transitioning, whether we're doing a professional transition, like I did back into work after being at home for a while, or we're retiring, or I've worked also with graduate students who are stepping into their profession, and I've worked with other professionals who are shifting out from one area of expertise into another. We're going to have this inner critic that pops up, and it's called the saboteur, and it's going to say, whoa, stop. What are you thinking? This is a dumb idea. And it might come up in a lot of different guises. It might come up in inertia. It might show up in fear. That's a big one. And it's just trying to protect us. And the way we deal with that voice is, first of all, we identify it. I think my inner critic is kind of activated because it's feeling threatened right now. And just identifying that voice, that saboteur, really helps to put it in perspective. And then if we can come back to our values, what's important to us? Like, for instance, when I returned to work, I thought, well, it's important to me to keep growing, and I also want to be a good role model for my children to have the courage to pursue their dreams. So when we can come back into our values, we come back into our prefrontal cortex, into our more evolved brain, into our higher self. And when we come into our higher self, this gives us ammunition against that saboteur, because it's interesting with all of the neuroimaging that's being done now. What they found is these two parts of the brain cannot be activated at the same time. So if you can tap into your values, you can quiet that inner critic. And you can work from a part of your brain that's looking into your highest interests. And often there is a 2% truth that the saboteur kind of latches onto and exaggerates or contorts, and that's how we get hooked. But once you're into your prefrontal cortex and your values, you can look at that 2% truth and have it in perspective. So for instance, when I returned to work, yeah, it was disruptive, but it wasn't like something where our family fell apart. It was very manageable. So it's knowing your values gives you ammunition against this inner critic. It gives you access to your higher self, and it acts as a guidepost for your decision making and the choices that you make. Like if you go back to the Christ and St. Luke's values or the values of Jesus, if we use those values as our guidepost, then we know we're staying on the path that's congruent with our best selves. Any questions or comments? Okay. So I like looking at values in our work because I think that that's a big deal. And sometimes our values aren't honored at work. And I'll give you an example. The work that I did when I returned to work was very important to me, but it didn't honor every single one of my values. But I was okay with that because it was so important to me, and I was in touch with other values that needed to be honored instead. So for instance, humor wasn't a big part of where I was working, but that was okay. You know, luckily my husband really keeps that value alive at home. So so it wasn't like a desert in my life. But at any rate, I think it's important to think about, or invite you to think about how your core values are expressed through your everyday life, through whether you have paid work or not, but how you're living your life. And the other thing, we're going to wrap up in just a minute, is this is an exercise I invite some of my clients to do, is to take a value that's important to you, say integrity, and look at your week through that lens. And I would look at your list of values and just choose one. Which one would be fun or interesting to kind of really examine this week and see how it's playing out, not in a judgy way, but in a really curious way. When I used integrity, I was really amazed at the different layers of integrity. So I started thinking things like, how does this honor my value of integrity? Like, for instance, being on time, or like waking up early with my alarm clock to go for a run, or how am I honoring my value of integrity by staying true to my business goals? So it's very interesting to see, like, or humor. And one time I used humor in the week, and it was a horrible week. It was a horrible week. And so I was like, my value of humor is not being honored. And that's how I saw that. And I thought, I don't think humor is a good one to use because that's a little more spontaneous. But find a value and see how it's being played out in your life. And I have this list of things like thoughts, choices, actions. You can really see, look at your calendar and what you have scheduled. And do you have things scheduled in there that really reflect some of your values or not? Or look at how you spend your money, the thoughts that go through your head. And then what you just do. And my coach I thought this was a great idea, and I mentioned this at the beginning, but what if we looked at our identity as part of our value system as opposed to our titles? I think we get really caught up with our identity being so enmeshed in our professional titles or whatever it is that we do. And it's very different. It's from a very internal space to come from my identity as part of my values, my core values of what's important to me and who I am. All right. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Joseph Campbell: "The privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you are." So staying connected to your values helps you to become more and more of who you are, and that's who we need in the world. Thank you.